Hello, my name is Lindsay Harris. I teach at the University of the District of Columbia, David A. Clark School of Law, and direct the Immigration and Human Rights Clinic. And today I'm going to talk to you for just a few minutes about our international system for refugee protection and where it comes from. So we're going to think through the very basic international legal instruments or treaties, conventions that govern the law of asylum in the United States. And I'm going to start with a story. And this is a story of the SS St. Louis, which was a rather famous ship and a journey that was taken in 1939 that's come to be known as the Voyage of the Damned. Now, the SS St. Louis in 1939 contained 936 Jewish refugees who were trying to escape from Nazi Germany. They first sailed to Cuba, where they were turned away. Cuba wanted $500 a person and they didn't have it. They tried to come to the United States, and President Roosevelt at the time let some of them in, but turned most of them away. They went on and tried Canada, and eventually turned back to Europe, where some of them disembarked and were accepted in Holland, France, and Belgium, but some of them were returned to Nazi Germany and faced the gas chambers and concentration camps. So the recognition was, in the wake of this incident, that the international community had to step up, had to do something and step in where a nation state persecuted or failed to protect its very own citizens. So the countries at the time came together, and in 1951 they drafted the International Convention on the Status of Refugees. And today 145 states have signed on to the Refugee Convention. And what it did was set up the definition of a refugee. So we've had this definition of a refugee for almost 70 years at this point. And the convention says that the signatories, the states who sign on to the convention, have a duty and obligation to provide protection to refugees. And they define refugees in Article 1 as people who, owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted because of one of the 5 statutorily protected grounds, race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. They're outside of their country of nationality, and because they are afraid, they're unwilling to go back and avail themselves of the protection of that country. So the definition that we see today in US asylum law really comes from the convention and the protocol to the convention, which I'll talk about in a minute. The convention also included a very important concept, and that is the concept of non-refoulement. And for those of you who don't speak French, that is the concept that you should not return or refouler a refugee to a place where their life or freedom would be threatened because of, again, one of those 5 protected grounds: race, religion, nationality, social group, or political opinion. So the 1951 convention was very important, but it was limited. It was actually time limited, temporally limited, to people who were made refugees by events occurring prior to 1951, and it also gave states signing on to it an option to limit protection regionally, just to people who were made refugees by events occurring in Europe. So it was temporally and geographically limited. But it did set up some very important rights for those who are recognized as refugees that a nation-state signatory had to pay attention to and make possible, as well as certain exclusions, people who could be kept out even though they actually do meet the refugee definition. So this slide here just depicts for you the exclusion grounds. The Refugee Convention allows states to exclude those who are guilty of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and other serious crimes. But it also sets up some rights, at least on a par with other immigrants within that country: a right to housing, to education, to travel outside of the country. The nation state must provide something equivalent to a passport. Here in the US, that's a refugee travel document. And you're not supposed to be barred for entering through irregular channels. So in 1967, there was an update to the 1951 convention, and around the same number of state parties to it. Interestingly, the US, along with a couple of other countries, have only signed on to the protocol. We signed on in 1968. And what the protocol did was basically incorporate most of the articles of the 1951 Convention, and it binds signatories to the concepts contained within the original Refugee Convention. But it took away any regional limitation or any time limitation. So it recognized that a refugee could be somebody from anywhere in the world at any time. Now, in the US, there's some controversy over whether this is a self-executing treaty or not, whether it just automatically counts within our domestic laws without being implemented via domestic legislation, but it actually was implemented in the US in 1980 with the Refugee Act. So I'm going to talk about just one more in this trio of international agreements or conventions, and that is the Convention Against Torture. So the Convention Against Torture also provides potential relief for refugees and asylum seekers. That was the product of many years of work by international advocates against torture, and it came into being in 1984 with the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment. Article 1 actually defines torture, and you can take a look at that yourself. I'd recommend you actually read these conventions, give them a skim so you're familiar with the terminology and how they're set up. And then Article 3 makes it clear that no state party to the convention can expel or extradite a person to a place, to a state, where there are substantial grounds to believe that she or he would be in danger of being subjected to torture. So the same kind of principle as the non-refoulement language in the Refugee Convention, but here it's within CAT, the Convention Against Torture, and importantly, there are not those exclusionary grounds that we see for the Refugee Convention, where countries are allowed to exclude those who have committed crimes against humanity, are believed to be war criminals, or have committed other serious crimes. So that's just a few minutes on the convention system that provided some of the groundwork and framework for the US system of refugee protection. Thank you so much for listening.